It was completely unexpected. I had just returned to my apartment in Dallas, Texas after a grueling day at work, looking forward to the usual routine. My wife, Emily, was usually home by 5:30 p.m. She worked as an administrative assistant but had a strict schedule. I, on the other hand, often got home closer to 6:30 p.m. Most evenings were predictable. Emily would be in the kitchen preparing dinner, and we'd eat together, discussing our days. Afterward, we'd relax on the couch or watch TV, ending the night in the bedroom. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. At 33, I didn't expect my life to suddenly unravel. As I unlocked the door to our second-floor apartment, the faint sound of laughter reached me. That was odd. I stepped in and saw Emily sitting on the couch, holding hands with Mark Hansen, her boss. Mark was a lawyer at Bradley, Pierce and Jacobs, where Emily worked. For a moment, I stood frozen. Then my voice found me. What the hell is going on here? Emily looked startled but quickly composed herself. Sit down, Jake. We need to talk. Talk? About what? And why the hell are you holding hands with your boss? That's exactly what we need to discuss, she said, avoiding eye contact. Please, just sit down. I'd rather stand, I replied sharply, feeling my pulse quicken. My fists clenched at my sides as Mark looked at me with an air of calm arrogance, which only fueled my growing anger. Emily glanced at Mark, who gave her a subtle nod. She took a deep breath and began. This isn't easy to say, but Mark and we've fallen in love. I'm filing for divorce. Her words hit me like a freight train. What? I managed to say, my voice cracking. I've already decided. Mark's handled all the paperwork, she continued, pulling a folder from the coffee table. I'm not asking for much, just my clothes and personal belongings. Everything will be finalized in 90 days if you sign. Mark finally spoke, his voice smooth and deliberate. Jake, this doesn't have to be messy. I understand this is a shock, but Emily and he never finished. I launched forward, my right hand landing squarely on his smug face, sending him staggering backward. The folder flew from his hands, and papers scattered across the floor. Before he could recover, I grabbed him by the shirt and shoved him against the wall. You think you can just waltz into my home and take my wife? I growled. Mark gasped for air, struggling to push me away. Emily screamed, Stop it, Jake. Let him go. I released him, shoving him hard enough that he stumbled into the coffee table. He collapsed onto the couch, holding his chest. You're insane, he wheezed. You've got 5 seconds to get out of my apartment before I make this worse for you, I spat, towering over him. Mark glanced at Emily, who was frozen in place. Emily, let's go. No, I said, pointing at her. She stays. You leave. Mark hesitated but then scrambled for the door. He paused at the threshold, turning back to me. You'll regret this. Not as much as you will, I said coldly, slamming the door behind him. The room fell silent, save for the sound of Emily's ragged breathing. She stood by the couch, her arms wrapped around herself as though trying to shield herself from my anger. How long? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. What? She replied, startled. How long have you been screwing him behind my back? Emily flinched at my words. It's not like that, don't lie to me. I roared, slamming my fist against the wall. How long, Emily? Tears welled up in her eyes. 6 months, she whispered. I laughed bitterly. 6 months. While I've been working overtime, planning our future, and trying to be a good husband, you've been sneaking around with your boss. It's not that simple, Jake, she said, her voice breaking. I wasn't happy, you weren't happy. I interrupted. And your solution was to betray me? To bring him into our home and sit on my couch like you're the victims here? She wiped her eyes, trying to regain composure. I didn't plan for this to happen. It just did. I shook my head in disbelief. You know what? I don't care. Pack your things and get out. Emily's expression shifted, her tears replaced by defiance. I'm not leaving. This is my home too. Not anymore, I snapped. You gave that up the moment you decided to bring him here. She stared at me for a moment before walking to the bedroom, slamming the door behind her. I stood there, fists clenched, my mind racing. How had my life fallen apart in a single evening? Unable to stay in the apartment, I grabbed my keys and left. I drove aimlessly through the streets of Dallas, the city lights blurring as I tried to make sense of what had happened. Eventually, I found myself pulling into the parking lot of the Lone Star Grill, a cozy diner I used to frequent before Emily and I got married. The place hadn't changed much in the 8 years since I'd last been there. The same neon sign buzzed above the entrance, and the faint smell of fried food greeted me as I stepped inside. I slid into a booth in the corner, ordering a burger and a beer. As I waited for my food, I replayed the events of the night in my head. How had I missed the signs? Was I so wrapped up in work that I hadn't noticed Emily drifting away? And what kind of man brings divorce papers into another man's home? The sheer audacity of it all made my blood boil. The waitress brought my order, giving me a sympathetic smile. Rough night? She asked. You could say that, I replied, taking a swig of my beer. You look like you've got the weight of the world on your shoulders, she said, leaning against the booth. Want to talk about it? I shook my head. Thanks, but I'm not sure where I'd even start. She nodded and left me to my meal. As I ate, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Emily. I'll stay with my sister tonight. We'll talk tomorrow. I stared at the message, my grip tightening on the phone. Talk? What was there to talk about? She'd already made her choice. But a part of me, a small, desperate part, still wanted answers. Why had she done this? Was there something I could have done to stop it? I finished my meal and left the diner, still no closer to understanding how my life had unraveled so quickly. The next morning, I woke up on the couch in my apartment. I hadn't slept much, and the faint light seeping through the blinds did nothing to improve my mood. Emily's absence was glaringly obvious, her favorite mug was still in the sink, her slippers by the door, and the faint scent of her perfume lingered in the air. It made me sick. I needed answers, and I wasn't going to get them sitting around. After a quick shower, I got dressed and headed to First Federal Bank. Something Emily said the night before had stuck with me: Mark's handled all the paperwork. That could only mean one thing: she'd been preparing for this for weeks, maybe months, and there was no way she hadn't touched our finances. The teller, a woman in her early 20s with a cheerful smile, greeted me. Good morning. How can I help you today? I need to check the balance on my accounts, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Sure. Can I see some ID? I handed over my driver's license and waited as she typed on her keyboard. Her smile faltered as she looked at the screen. Mr. Carter, it seems there was a withdrawal made yesterday. A large one. How large? I asked, my jaw tightening. Half of your checking account and half of your savings, she replied hesitantly. Around $84,000 in total. I felt the blood drain from my face. Who authorized this? It looks like a joint account holder. Emily Carter? I nodded, my suspicions confirmed. She hadn't just betrayed me emotionally, she'd gone for my wallet too. Thanks, I said tersely, walking out of the bank. By the time I got back to my truck, I was shaking with rage. Emily had taken more than money, she'd taken what little trust one had left in her. I needed time to think, so I drove aimlessly through Dallas until I found myself in front of a familiar building, Crossroads Storage. This was where Emily and I had kept a safety deposit box, a relic of better times when we'd been saving for a down payment on a house. I hadn't checked it in months, but if she'd forgotten about it, I might still have something left. Inside, the manager, Sam, recognized me immediately. "Jake. Long time no see. What brings you by?" "Just need to check the box," I said, trying to sound casual. "No problem. Let me grab the key." Moments later, I was in the small private room where the safety deposit boxes were kept. My hands trembled as I unlocked it. Inside, I found 6 certificates of deposit, each worth $135,000, savings Emily had apparently overlooked. But that wasn't the real prize. There it was, tucked into the corner, a small jewelry box, one that had belonged to Emily's grandmother. Inside were pieces Emily had always been proud of, a diamond necklace, emerald earrings, and an antique bracelet. I remembered her saying once that the set had been appraised for over $100,000. I closed the box and stared at it for a long moment. What would she do if she realized it was missing? Would she think I'd sold it? Or would she remember this safe and come after it? Either way, I decided I wasn't leaving it here for her to find. That evening, I called Rachel, Emily's sister. Rachel and I had always gotten along, and if there was anyone who could handle Emily's dramatics, it was her. She answered after 2 rings. "Jake? I didn't expect to hear from you." "Hey, Rachel. I need a favor." "Let me guess, this has to do with Emily." "Sort of," I admitted. "I left some things for her at the apartment, but I also need to drop something off with you. Can we meet?" Rachel sighed. "She's already called me, you know. She said you went crazy and threw her boss out. She left out the part where she's been sleeping with him for 6 months." There was a pause. "I'll meet you," Rachel said finally. "Where?" "Bud's Bar, tonight at 7. I got to Bud's Bar early and ordered a drink, finding a table near the back. When Rachel arrived, she looked as tired as I felt. She dropped into the seat across from me and glanced at the drink I'd already ordered for her. "Thanks. You look like hell, Jake." "Feel like it too," I admitted, sliding the jewelry box across the table. "This is for you." Rachel opened it, her eyes widening. "Is this?" "It's the family heirlooms. I took them from the safety deposit box before Emily could get to them." Rachel stared at me. "Why are you giving them to me?" "You always said she didn't deserve them," I said with a shrug. "Now you don't have to fight over it." She closed the box and sighed. "You're playing a dangerous game, Jake. She's furious enough already. She stole $84,000 from me yesterday. I'd say we're even." Rachel smirked. "Fair point. But don't expect her to let this go. You know Emily, she always has to have the last word." "Let her try," I said, finishing my drink. "I'm done playing nice." The next morning, I woke to a knock on my apartment door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I grabbed a baseball bat from the closet and cautiously opened the door. To my surprise, it was a man in a suit. "Jake Carter?" he asked. "That's me," I replied. He handed me a manila envelope and said, "You've been served. Good luck." Without another word, he turned and walked away. I shut the door, dropped the bat, and opened the envelope. It was divorce papers, just as Emily had promised. She wasn't asking for alimony, just a clean split. I skimmed the document, my jaw tightening at the sight of her lawyer's name, Mark Hansen. Of course. He wasn't just sleeping with my wife, he was trying to play the noble savior. The arrogance of it made my blood boil. I signed the papers immediately, sealed them in the return envelope, and tossed it on the counter. I wasn't going to fight her. She wasn't worth it. Later that day, I called Rachel. It's done. She got what she wanted. Rachel hesitated. Are you okay? I will be, I said. I just need to move on. Good. Because Emily's already spinning the story. She told Dad you went crazy and stole her jewelry. I laughed bitterly. Did you tell him the truth? Of course. He doesn't believe her anyway. He knows how she is. Thanks, Rachel. For everything. Don't thank me yet, she said with a chuckle. She's not done making your life difficult. That evening, I met up with Megan, an old high school friend, at the Copper Spur, a local country bar. Megan had reached out after hearing about my situation through the grapevine. We hadn't talked in years, but seeing her was like a breath of fresh air. Still as handsome as ever, she teased as we sat at the bar. And you're still a troublemaker, I replied, smiling for what felt like the first time in days. We talked for hours, catching up on old times and laughing about our teenage antics. Megan had just moved back to Dallas after a rough breakup, and she understood the mess I was going through better than anyone else. You know, she said, sipping her drink, I always wondered what would have happened if we hadn't lost touch. Me too, I admitted. She smiled, and for a moment, the weight of my problems seemed to lift. But before I could say anything more, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. You'll regret this. Mark. Megan noticed the change in my expression. Everything okay? Just someone trying to mess with me, I said, slipping my phone back into my pocket. Nothing I can't handle. Over the next few weeks, Megan and I grew closer. She was exactly what I needed, a reminder that life could still be good. But just as things started to settle down, Emily found a new way to make her presence felt. It started with a call from my landlord. Jake, I got a complaint from a tenant about someone trying to get into your apartment. Said it was a blonde woman. Sound familiar? Yeah, I muttered. I'll handle it. I called Rachel. Did Emily mention anything about coming by my place? She didn't, but that doesn't mean she didn't try. She's been in a mood lately. She needs to leave me alone. Rachel sighed. You know Emily. She doesn't let go easily. I hung up, fuming. Emily had no right to be snooping around my place, especially after everything she'd done. I decided it was time to confront her. The next day, I showed up at her office. The receptionist, a young woman with sharp eyes, looked up as I entered. Can I help you? Jake Carter. I need to see Emily. She hesitated but then nodded. One moment. A few minutes later, Emily appeared in the lobby, her expression a mix of annoyance and unease. What are you doing here? You've been trying to get into my apartment, I said bluntly. Her eyes widened. I have not. Don't lie to me. The landlord saw you. Her defensive posture faltered. I just wanted to talk to you. About what? I asked, crossing my arms. She glanced around, lowering her voice. About the jewelry. I laughed, shaking my head. Of course. That's all you care about. It's my family's, she snapped. You had no right to take it. You had no right to take $84,000 from our accounts, I shot back. We're even. This isn't over, Jake, she said through gritted teeth. It is for me, I replied, turning on my heel and walking away. That night, I told Megan about the confrontation. She listened quietly, her brow furrowed. You know she's not going to stop, right? I know, I admitted. But I don't care. I'm not letting her ruin my life. Megan reached across the table and took my hand. You deserve better, Jake. Maybe, I said. But right now, I'm just trying to figure out what comes next. The next few weeks passed quietly, too quietly. Emily hadn't made another move, but I knew her well enough to sense she was planning something. Meanwhile, things with Megan were going well. We spent more time together, and she quickly became my anchor in the storm. I hadn't realized how much I needed someone like her until she was there. One evening, Megan and I went to the Saddlehorn, another popular spot in Dallas for live music and dancing. The band was loud, the drinks were flowing, and for the first time in months, I felt like myself again. We were mid-dance when I noticed a familiar face by the bar, Emily. She was with Mark, though they didn't seem to be enjoying themselves. They were locked in what looked like a heated argument. "Do you want to leave?" Megan asked, following my gaze. "No," I said, tightening my grip on her hand. "I'm not running from her." We continued dancing, but I couldn't help glancing back at the bar. Mark stormed off, leaving Emily standing there, visibly flustered. When the song ended, Megan and I returned to our table, only for Emily to approach us moments later. "Jake," she began, her voice sharp. "Can we talk?" "I'm with someone," I replied, motioning to Megan. Emily's eyes darted to Megan, her lips tightening. "This won't take long. Whatever you need to say, you can say in front of her," I said, crossing my arms. She hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. Finally, she blurted out, "I want the jewelry back." I laughed. "Not happening, Emily." Her voice rose. "It's mine. You had no right to take it." "You took $84,000 from our accounts," I replied coolly. "I'd say we're more than even." Emily's face turned red with anger. "You'll regret this, Jake." "I doubt it," I said, turning back to Megan. "Have a good night, Emily." Fuming, she stormed off. Megan smirked, raising her glass. Well, that was fun. The next day, I got a call from Rachel. "You're not going to believe this," she said. "Try me. Emily called Dad this morning. She told him you stole the jewelry and said she's considering pressing charges." I sighed, pinching the bridge of my nose. "Of course she is. She won't go through with it," Rachel assured me. "She knows she doesn't have a leg to stand on." "Maybe, but I'm getting tired of this." Rachel hesitated. "There's something else. Mark's firm found out about their relationship. He's been suspended." That caught my attention. "Really?" "Yep. Apparently, someone tipped them off. The partners are furious." I couldn't help but smile. "Good. Jake, did you have anything to do with that?" "No," I said honestly. "But I'm glad someone did." A few weeks later, I got the final paperwork confirming the divorce. I was officially free. Megan and I decided to celebrate by taking a weekend trip to Austin. The change of scenery was exactly what I needed. We spent the days exploring the city and the nights talking about everything and nothing. For the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful about the future. One night, as we sat by the lake, Megan turned to me and said, "Do you think you'll ever forgive her, Emily?" I asked, surprised. She nodded. "For what she did? For how it ended?" I thought about it for a long moment. Maybe. Not for her sake, but for mine. Holding on to the anger, it's exhausting. I don't want to carry it forever. Megan smiled, resting her head on my shoulder. "You're a good man, Jake." I kissed her forehead. "You make me want to be better." Months passed, and Emily faded from my life like a bad memory. I later heard she and Mark didn't last long. He moved out of Dallas after losing his chance at a partnership. As for Emily, she ended up back in her old neighborhood, still clinging to the bitterness she'd created. Meanwhile, Megan and I continued to build something real. One evening, as we sat on the couch, I pulled a small box from my pocket. "What's that?" she asked, her eyes widening. I opened it to reveal a simple diamond ring. "Megan, you've seen me at my worst, and you've given me reasons to believe in love again. Will you marry me?" Tears filled her eyes as she nodded. "Yes, Jake. 1,000 times yes." In the end, I didn't just survive the storm, Megan helped me rebuild. And as I stood beside her on our wedding day, I realized that sometimes, losing everything is the only way to find what truly matters.